Hello and welcome everybody to this live chat with Karima Bennoune, the United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. My name is Nanada Akonsichiema, and I'm the Director for Information, Communications and Media at AWID, and it's a pleasure to facilitate this conversation. Karima and I will be live for approximately 20 minutes, so if you have any questions or comments, you may pop that in the comments box below the line. Karima also recently issued a new report which is entitled Universality, Cultural Diversity and Cultural Rights. So I'll be asking her to share some insights from that report. We will also post a link to the report in the comments box below. For those who listen or watch this video after the chat has ended, please send in any additional thoughts and comments that you have, and we will do our best to facilitate a response. So Karima, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to AWID today.
Thank you very much, both to AWID and to you and to everyone who's joining us this morning.
So I'm going to start with a really basic question myself, who may not be as familiar with how the human rights system works at the United Nations. Can you tell us who a Special Rapporteur is and what your specific work around cultural rights involves?
Absolutely. So Special Rapporteurs are independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is a political body that it has state representatives. And we report to the Council on human rights issues within our mandates. In my case, the content of my mandate is the cultural rights, which are an important integral part of universal rights. And basically at the heart of cultural rights, we find the right of everyone to take part in cultural life without discrimination, drawing both from Article 15 of the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and also Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Thank you so much. Like you are probably aware, the majority of AWID's members and supporters are feminist activists and gender justice activists who work to promote human rights. And we understand that the entire human rights system is built around this. And if you could also say a bit more about how cultural rights fits where universality is concerned.
Could you repeat your question, please?
Yes. So I was saying that the majority of AWID's members and supporters are feminist activists and gender justice activists. And we understand that the entire human rights system is built around the concept of universality. It would be helpful if you could say a bit more around why every feminist should be concerned about the issue of universality and how cultural rights is connected to universality.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Universality is a feminist issue. Universality is one of the core tools for human rights defenders all around the world and for women human rights defenders in particular. Universality is a very simple idea. It's the idea that there are no second-class human beings, that all human beings have inherent human rights by virtue of being human, whatever categories they may fit into. And that is the core idea at the heart of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 70th anniversary of which we celebrate on the 10th of December of this year. And really the human rights of women have been a sort of a site for attacks on universality, for saying that women are somehow different, that women's rights are governed by culture, not by universal human rights norms, and of course by patriarchal interpretations of the meaning of culture. And so defending women's human rights as a core part of universal human rights, defending the principles of non-discrimination and equality between men and women, which are explicitly enumerated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, thanks to women activists who took part in that drafting process. All of that is absolutely critical for feminist activists everywhere in the world.
And what you said around, you know, when it comes to women's rights, sometimes people raise the issue of culture. That's something that resonates with me as someone who's Ghanaian, as somebody who's African. So in our context, for example, people like to falsely claim that, for example, homosexuality is an-African, which we know is not the truth, but then sometimes people like that almost as a weapon. I'm sure these are issues that you grapple with in your work. Could you say how you address some of these issues when people raise them?
Absolutely. One of the things that I have said over and over again as Special Rapporteur is that it's also critically important to understand what cultural rights are not. Cultural rights are not the same thing as cultural relativism. They're not a sort of escape clause from universal human rights. Cultural rights are to be enjoyed in the context of universal human rights. And I really talk in the report about the kind of integral relationship between cultural rights, universality, and cultural diversity. These are not weapons to be used against each other. These are vital rights concepts that are really interlocking. And I am very alarmed by the amount of cultural relativism that we are seeing, that is using culture as an excuse for violating human rights. We're saying that other people or people who fit into certain categories deserve lesser rights. And we need to be very clear. That has been repudiated by international law. States themselves have reaffirmed again and again the universality of human rights, including in our most recent human rights conventions, like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And what we have to do as women human rights defenders is to really reclaim culture. A culture is not the enemy of human rights. No. Women have an equal right to define culture, to decide which cultural practices to discontinue because they no longer are in accordance with our understanding, our evolving understanding of human rights. And I think it's very important to understand and to remember that many things that we today recognize as being completely unacceptable, such as segregation, such as systematic racial discrimination, these things were also justified in the name of quote unquote culture. And we recognize that as being completely unacceptable. So one of my main jobs as the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights is again to remind states, to remind all of us that culture is not about diminishing human rights. It is about amplifying human rights, and that cultural rights are absolutely not the same thing as cultural relativism.
Thank you. No, that's like a really helpful point. But then I'm also wondering if you have any maybe suggestions for people who want to resist this kind of idea around cultural relativism and who want to resist the notion that this is cultural. And so, it's not a matter of rights, it's a matter of our culture. Any suggestions?
Well, you can certainly make use of the reports that I wrote and that my predecessor, Farida Shahid, also a woman human rights defender from Pakistan, wrote. You can find all of those on the homepage of the mandate. You can follow the work of the mandate on Twitter at UNSR Culture, and you will find in our reports a lot of international citations and international standards that you can cite to support your work. You will also find examples of some of the interesting work that is being done by activists around the world defending universality that can perhaps be modeled and adapted elsewhere. You will also find cases. So I take up some cases of human rights defenders in the report, such as the case of Mohsen Hassan, who is an Egyptian woman human rights defender, and the charges against her in the initial instance when she faced her first summons included things like sort of trying to change the culture of women, or quote unquote irresponsibly trying to liberate women in Egypt. And what I say in the report is, if we are to achieve the very human rights standards to which states have agreed, we need more Mohsen Hassans, not less, and we need them to be able to do their work. So I hope that all of these kinds of resources and cases and examples that you can find in the report can be of use to human rights defenders. And I'm also eager to receive information from women human rights defenders on the ground about what they are doing and strategies that I can learn from and share elsewhere. There's also a communications procedure that we have in the mandate that you can find on the homepage, where you can submit cases to the mandate, cases that are arising in these areas, which I'm then able to take up confidentially with governments and in certain circumstances make a public statement as well.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful to know. And I know AWID members are super aware of the case of Mosen Hassan, and we are all in solidarity with Mosen and women human rights defenders everywhere. So thank you also for highlighting that in your reports. I'm also thinking of how recently several hundred women human rights defenders met in Paris to mark the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, your reports on universality, cultural diversity, and cultural rights also marked this anniversary. I'm wondering, are there additional issues that you would want activists to be aware of in this moment when it comes to universality, cultural diversity, and cultural rights? Are there particular issues you want us to have on our radar moving forward?
I would say really trying to reiterate this core message that universality is not the enemy of cultural diversity, and cultural diversity is not the enemy of universality, and really taking a holistic approach in these difficult times to defending both principles is critically important. I really hope that more and more of us will stand up to defend the principle of universality. It's become very fashionable. I can tell you on college campuses, I am a university professor as well. Unfortunately, on many college campuses, cultural relativism has become very fashionable. And it's not just a flawed theoretical construct. It is an idea that sometimes has fatal consequences for women and others around the world. And so this is a principle we really need to stand up and defend very openly. And I hope that women human rights defenders will find feminist ways to mark the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we have a great group of women who participated in the drafting to thank for that standard. People like Minerva Bernardino from the Dominican Republic and Hansa Mehta from India and the Pakistani delegate. I mean, it was thanks to these delegates that we have the explicit reference to the equality of men and women in the Universal Declaration. We have them to thank for the fact that the Declaration does not refer to men, but to men and women. And I think it's really a very important time to honor them and honor their legacy, both by really recognizing the importance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for women, but also by very openly defending the principle of universality, which is at its very heart.
Thank you so much. And I mean, I found it really helpful in terms of what you said around how activists can actually use your report to support their advocacy and the broader work of their movements. Also found it very helpful in terms of how you shared how people could connect with your authors, how you could highlight some of their. Are there additional ways in which you would want feminist activists and movements to support the work that you do?
Thank you so much for asking this question. I think that if I can say in a very friendly way, sometimes that the women's human rights movement around the world has made a mistake at the UN, and that is to focus, for the most part, on mechanisms like CEDAW or the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women without also focusing on other mandates and other mechanisms where women's human rights are critically important to consider. And I would ask women human rights defenders also please to engage with other mandates and mechanisms at the UN. Come to the Human Rights Council in March when I present my reports. And I always try to have feminist content and content about women's human rights, whatever issue I am working on. I did a dedicated report in the past, as many of you know, on the cultural rights of women and the impact of fundamentalism and extremism on those rights. I need your help. I need you to lobby states to support my reports. And when civil society can take the floor in the Human Rights Council to speak up directly in support of those reports, that would be an incredibly helpful process. But also work with me to develop an implementation toolkit for these reports so that we can can find creative ways of using them on the ground, because my work is not an end in itself. My work is about advancing the implementation of cultural rights norms and about finding positive ways to interact with the human rights defenders and the women human rights defenders on the ground who are also engaging in trying to move forward our implementation efforts. So please do work with me. This is a really collaborative endeavor.
Thank you so much, Karima, for being willing to work with us in this way. I just want to remind people who are watching or listening, you can share any comments or questions that you have. I know many people will watch this video after it has aired. Please post your questions and comments. We'll do our very best to reach out to Karima and facilitate a response. Like you can see, she really wants to engage with the feminist movement. I also want to point out to folks who are watching that AWID has some resources on our website about how to engage at the Human Rights Council. So do visit www.awid.org, and that link will be shared in the comments. So I'm going to wrap up shortly, and I'm wondering, Karima, if you have any final words that you'd like to share with the feminist activists who'll be listening.
Well, I think it's important that we not let culture be a conversation stopper. States raise culture, other kinds of actors raise culture as a way of shutting down discussion and just saying that's the way it is. And culture evolves continuously. Culture is sort of what human beings make it. It is not a separate thing. So we have to engage in conversations about culture. We have to demand women's equal cultural rights. We have to enhance the positive aspects of culture and cultures of equality for women's human rights, and not let culture just be a conversation stopper.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Karima, for taking the time to chat to us today. I'd like to remind those who are watching that you can visit the Observatory on the Universality of Rights website, where there's a link to Karima's latest report. You can also visit the AWID website, which is www.awid.org. I'd also like to encourage you to subscribe on our website to receive regular updates on our work, and also to learn how you can join AWID as a member and join us in our journey to co-create feminist realities together, which includes working with people like Karima to try and create a better human rights system for all of us. Thank you so much, Karima, for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much, and wishing you all the best of luck in your important work.